Okay, so welcome back to Talking Therapy, everybody. And today I'm very excited to have a lady, American lady. I think she's now living in Belgium, in Brussels, Meghan Kelly. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing your name
Yes.
correctly. And perhaps you'd like to just introduce yourself and speak a little bit about what you do and how you got to become a therapist. Was it always your kind of ambition or interest, that kind of thing? Over to you.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for this invitation. Happy to be here today. And yes, I'm Megan. I don't know if I'm talking to the camera or to Deb, to anyone listening. And I'm from Colorado in the United States, born and raised. And the vision of being a therapist always, it was not that, no, but I knew young I wanted to work with people and that was a gift, and that working with people in some capacity for the betterment of this world. I felt that very young. Being a teacher was always really prominent in my mind, which I've been doing for many years. But I would say it's really my life journey and life itself that have pushed me into this therapeutic path. And so basically, I was quite inspired by, it was an accident of someone very close to me when I was just starting the university. And I was introduced to many different types of therapies then. And I remember thinking, this didn't happen for any reason. This didn't happen for no reason. This means something. And unfortunately, I didn't have much support to support that path of becoming a therapist then. But I would say the seeds were planted. So I ended up studying business, marketing, and I worked in marketing research for a long time. And it just wasn't the most fulfilling job, someone who has this heart to work with people and wanting to make a difference. And I found myself behind a desk analyzing data, hardly even with people. And so little by little, I started trying different things, pursuing my interest in Spanish. And I ended up moving abroad to finish my master's in Argentina. And that's really when life began. I'm going to say it that way because that's when the life I chose started, not the life I was just given or told to have, And so that's really what happened. And Argentina, I was in Buenos Aires for 5 years. It's just a tremendous place for therapy. In Buenos Aires, if you don't have a therapist, you're the strange one. And so everybody's got a therapist. People really value personal growth. And they're open that they have therapy. Like they may say, no, I can't meet today because I've got therapy. So it just provided a whole new world for me. I'm from conservative America, where therapy was not only hard to find, but not so accessible. And it just opened my world. And I found many, many techniques that really, as I said, opened my world and opened my eyes and opened my heart. And so it was really from then on where I took advantage of many of these types of therapies and then eventually started training in them. Mm-hmm. So that's my background. Do you want me to tell you now what I do?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure.
Okay, I don't know if that was too long of a...
No, it's cool.
I guess I felt a little nostalgic thinking back about these times because I think it always was in my heart to be a therapist. And so what I do today, I'm an integrative therapist, and I use this word because I use a variety of techniques together to treat the whole person, considering the mind, body, and spirit aspect. I work with family constellations in groups and in individual sessions here in Brussels and online. I am trained in psychosomatic bodywork, the bioenergetics approach, which is how I know you. And I use some other tools, kinesiology and actually astrology, to guide people as well. So I have a toolbox, and it would be working with somebody. It's really based on what they need and how they respond, and no one size for all.
No. Hey, interesting, nice. So how long did you end up being in Buenos Aires?
I was there for 5 years.
Wow.
Yeah, for 5 years, the plan was to spend 1 year, finish my master's, improve my Spanish, go back, probably be a teacher. And I started becoming a teacher there is what happened. I've been a teacher in companies for a long time now. and teaching English to adults, always for professional development purposes. But then it was the first that I found the constellations, and it really transformed my life, opened my mind to these influences we have, and also really connected me with the body, because in a constellation, the body is the main tool. And I remember the first constellation, they said, the center I was at said, you know, you didn't respond much in your body. And I thought, okay, is that possible? First of all, that I could respond in my body? What does that mean? And that was just the start of many, many things, and many learning so much about myself and what is possible, the dimensions that we aren't really aware of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm kind of intrigued. What's the therapy scene like in Buenos Aires? Did you just sort of plug straight into it and see what was going on? What's popular out there for people, or at the time you were there?
It's quite common for, well, first of all, for psychoanalysis. Okay, there's I think Buenos Aires has more therapists or psychotherapists per capita than any other city in the world. I mean, I don't have that as a fact, but I wouldn't be surprised. And so, as I said, if you don't have a therapist, you're the strange one. And that was the opposite of where I came from, you know? And so I speak Spanish well, but I was able to find people also who speak English. And I've always been really interested in, I'm a seeker, I always wanted to know more about myself. And so it just provided such a playground, really.
Mm-hmm.
So it's got the strong psychoanalysis background. It's known for that, Argentina. But in terms of alternative therapies, body-based approaches, I would say pretty much anything goes there.
Mm-hmm.
They're very, very, and Brazil, they're very much the same, where they're very open-minded. They very considerate of new approaches and alternative ideas, or putting them together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow, interesting.
Yeah, it's a great, amazing place for that.
Yeah. So you consider, like, you bring your kind of Latin influences, because I mean, bioenergetics and a lot of body-based therapy is quite, I mean, it's quite dominant in kind of Latin countries in many ways, I found, or like, if you just look at Europe, which I know a bit more, I mean, there's a bit in Germany, but it's mostly in Italy and Spain, you know, a lot of kind of the IIBA, the other bioenergetic schools, or Reichian people. It's mostly among the Latin people that seem to just kind of naturally respect the body in some way, or naturally take it into account. Like, even more sort of super intellectual Latins still tend to have more kind of respect for the body or somatic awareness than, say, the average North American or North European intellectual. Is that your kind of experience?
Well, it's interesting, you know, that somehow I ended up going to Latin America the excuse was to improve my Spanish, you know, which was always just a passion and an interest, not just for the language, but for the connection with the people. And it was also bioenergetics that I discovered in Argentina. Yeah. And so now, training in that in Spain and connecting with the Latin side, I can understand why. They're the connection with others, needing to be with others. Really, even the preference of being with others over the individual really makes for the connection, the touch, all those physical sensations that go with the work.
Mm.
And then later learning that bioenergetics comes from the US, from Alexander Lowen, who was an American. And I never knew of it when I was there, when I lived there. And even to this day, I know that it's not everywhere. It's because touch in therapy for itself was a big, and still continues to be, a question. And in American culture, it is very much, of course, I don't want to generalize. America's a big country, but the touch component in therapy was really a no-no.
Yeah.
And continues to be a little questionable, you know? So I, like with the constellation work, if I have a one-on-one session, we may touch someone's back to comfort them, and this isn't really a question, it's really acceptable. So I think it depends on the type of therapy. You know, it's such a big world. such a big world, the types of therapy, what they can do, and what is really accepted as a norm with each one.
Yeah. I mean, it often strikes me that, like, it is visible. Like, I was just being here in Mexico for 6 weeks, with the COVID rules, because they have a wave at the moment of COVID, so people just wear masks. I mean, they wear masks everywhere on the street, and they love their masks, and they wash their hands kind of obsessively. But there's not really any kind of social distancing much going on in Mexico, whereas in the UK, it would be pretty rare to see someone wearing a mask on the street, but they keep distance from each other, like almost like other people are kind of plague carriers or something like this. It's quite extreme, and it's just, I guess, how different, what creates a sense of safety for the people of different cultures. And for the British, it's more separation creates a feeling of safety, whereas for the Mexicans, it's more actually being close that creates a feeling of safety. It seems to be like somewhere intrinsic in the culture, particularly for the like mestiza and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think COVID has revealed some of these workings of culture, right?
Yes.
That the connection to the other, I'll wear a mask as long as I can still be together and not cut my social connections. Let's keep meeting. The mask is to protect you and me and everybody, but we're better together. It's more that belief that we're better together. And where I know in Northern Europe, even where I live now, the individual being alone, as you said, you see it more. You see it more. People live alone in Northern Europe more, especially when they're older, they may live alone. America is kind of a blend of all of these places. We have so much influence from the Latin world. But I myself, growing up in Colorado, it's more of an individualistic culture. And so I'm not there now. I'm not sure what's happening with COVID, but I suspect it's different than what you're saying. It doesn't have that, if we're not someone with that, like a Latin family, for example, it's the individualistic versus collective cultures that have really, really, you see it shining through in the COVID rules, in how people handled lockdown and how they are today and what is safety for them. Yeah.
I mean, on a deeper level, I often think it's like, as an individual, as someone just born and living in this world, in this environment, where kind of you have these two poles, like, who am I as an individual? Who am I within the group? And that's where all the kind of action or psychological action takes place, because you can't really say that one is better than the other on a grand scale. It's just that we're kind of thrown between these sides, as I see it, when I started to do a lot of group therapy about 20, 25 years ago for my own development, it was all group, and it was very powerful, because coming from a very individualistic culture, then suddenly to be, who am I in a completely group situation where we're together for days on end in very small spaces and all of this, tons of stuff comes up, and then at some point it was more like, okay, I'm used to group behaviors. I even lived communally in a spiritual commune for like the best part of 2 decades. But but then it's like, then I start to see, okay, the aspects of group behavior which are actually, which block individuality as well, and coming back out. It's interesting, it's like, because ideally, I suppose the mind wants to kind of know what's right, that there's some kind of principle that you can apply to society, but I don't think there really is. There's just these two poles, who am I as an individual? Who am I within a group,
Yeah, absolutely right. And some cultures would value the one over the other, or maybe have a little more influence of one over the other.
Yeah.
But it's a part of life, right? We're mammals. I was just reading this morning, we are mammals. We need the other to live. We even if we come from a culture that values individual over the collective, we need the other to live and to connect. Then this sense of belonging is a basic need. And when we're in a group, if it's like a group therapy or a group workshop, it can be challenging sometimes, because what's the first group we're a part of? Our family. Our family is the first group that we're with. And then that we learn to be who we are because of them. And so this need of belonging, what's my story of belonging in my family?
Mm-hmm.
So how do I carry that forward in my life, where I live with my culture and in any groups I'm part of?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Totally. You work a lot with family constellation, yeah?
Yeah. I work with that a lot, doing group workshops here in Brussels or online regularly. COVID's really opened the door to doing this online,
Mm-hmm.
which has really been a blessing. Now the work is more accessible and just getting more known because of that. And I'm little more and more, I'm starting to incorporate the body work before we get started, because as I said, in constellations, the body really is the main tool.
Mm-hmm.
If we're in a room together, it's easier to show the movement. It's easier to show the connection between the parts. Online, we tend to talk a little bit more, and getting in the body and using that is part of the evolution of this, especially working online.
Mm-hmm. So how do you, I mean, I'm kind of intrigued, because having done a bit of family constellation over the years here and there, as a participant, how do you actually set up some individual's constellation with a group of people on Zoom? I mean, how do you kind of go about it?
Well, we each have our little window like we do here,
Yeah.
and always encouraging them to, when we start, to stand and to try to show whatever image comes to them. For anyone listening who's not familiar with the constellation, we are working on a family story, an individual story, or it could be even organizational. Any challenge that someone is facing, it's more a problem-based therapy instead of a continual thing like bioenergetics or another technique. And so working online, it's very much the same. And what happens is that we're in our own space. You would stand and it's a lot of asking, who do you feel led to look at? Because we can't see who someone's looking at really. Unless they give some kind of a cue, unless they say, I only can see this person. So the fact that we're not in person also, you have to rely on your intuition a bit more. But I would say that is confirmation. For people who come, they see that, wow, I can trust my instinct. It is true. I can't look at that person. So they pick up on the field of information, just like we would in person. And so you could call it, I don't want to say it's better or worse, it's just different, not being in person.
Mm.
For one, it makes it more accessible for people.
Mm.
And as this is something that's been around many years, but it's emerging more and more known, it makes the entry point a little easier to come try it out, to come see what it's about, right? And on another hand, I see that for some people, being in their own home is actually very, very safe for them. And it's, so even though we're not together, we are, and it creates the work together creates a connection. It always does, whether we're in working online also, it attracts people from all over the world. So it's just quite amazing who comes.
Mm.
How people are connected to the stories that come about. And I have many people who return time and time again. So the online works very well.
Mm.
I'm more and more surprised every time.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Interesting. Yeah, nice to hear your
Try
experience.
that sometime.
Because like when all of these therapies kind of came around, there wasn't really like Zoom, there wasn't really, so
Right.
everything was done in person. And then I know a lot of therapists certainly developed the opinion that you can only do it in person, and
Yeah.
that it's just not possible, and they kind of shut out the possibility before even really thinking about it very much, with possibly at times with some validity, but nevertheless. And it took me a while to even consider creating online courses, which is more what I'm doing now, because I just kind of, now you can't do that online, in just like an immediate response from my mind. But it is fascinating to see how different therapists adapt their work to the online environment. And of course, it does make it much more accessible for people. It is like,
Yes. Yeah, I find that there are maybe two camps of people, you know, those who know I need to be in person. I need to be with others. I need to receive a real hug after the work is done. And I understand that and value that. And so trying my best, considering the circumstances, to continue to meet with others and make that possible.
Mm.
And then there are some others that may be even nervous to come to a group. And that's actually an obstacle for some people in a constellation. So for constellations specifically, working online, being in their space is safe. And then they see quickly that, wow, I do belong. I do have a place. I can participate.
Mm.
So it makes an entry point.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I would say there's different types of people, right? And so I try to accommodate both of those needs. I feel that working online, I like it quite a bit, and I find that it's very, very effective. And I think it's really a thing of the future, just just like the therapies being available online, working on ourself, this self-development aspect, and seeing that there's so many types of therapies out there, that really opening the door for people to take that step and to see the value in this, to
Mm.
see the value of knowing themselves and overcoming obstacles so they can be a better version of themselves.
Mm.
So I'm excited about this. The therapy is losing the stigma. And then also, unfortunately, through this difficult situation with the pandemic, I mean, something that none of us thought we would ever live through, it's really showing the trouble and the difficulties with mental health, and valuing that this is a part of health. This is just as important as our physical health. So I come from a place where there was a big stigma to therapy.
Mm.
And I see that changing.
Mm.
And
Mm.
I'm really glad about that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a great kind of point in a sense. For sometimes I look at the kind of psychological health of the West as been in a kind of almost slow decline in some ways, and maybe something as extreme as a pandemic, when everyone's kind of going into lockdown and fear, pushes it to a point where perhaps the culture and even the government or health services, social services have to get a bit more real about what works, as opposed to kind of going into an immediate just, okay, what drugs can we give people and how much do we have to pay the farm companies for them? It's like,
Yeah. Oh my
because
gosh.
it's been kind of going in that direction for quite a long time. And, I've often found it a bit crazy. My ex from a while ago, she was a clin psych PhD, and because I'm not really medically qualified in any way, but I just know a lot about therapy from my own work, and so we were going to create a project working just with people with basic level of clinical anxiety or depression, not too extreme, but people on low level medications, just to start to test out doing just basic sharing and basic body work in a space. This was a few years ago. We split up if we got this together, but I was just like intrigued by it, because it probably doesn't cost a lot to relieve most people's like depression or anxiety, at least to get it out of a kind of clinical level and just into a much more manageable state. It's just that, the whole model that's kind of emerged in the West is just much more orientated around substances and pharmacology and all of these kind of trials. And it's just gone a little bit crazy in certain ways, but a lot of people just miss connection, and whether physical or just sharing about what's happening in their life and being listened to, that's all they're really missing. And it wouldn't actually cost very much to give them that, but it's like, yeah, there's no kind of incentive there from the state to do that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And this makes me think of what we first talked about with the collective culture as an individual, where when it's such an individual culture, there also is that tendency to suffer alone or to not share what's going on. And that creates even more isolation, And when you're isolated, then these feelings you already have can expand more. And so I think this happens for many reasons, what you're mentioning about the medications. And first of all, it may be just the system you're in, like the United States. Doctors are under a lot of pressure, even this was happening long before the pandemic. And so I don't want to say it's just that's the only reason that it's easier to give out There, I think it's also just how the system works.
Yeah, yeah.
They're used to. And I do believe for some people, taking some sort of medication to support them is necessary.
Yep.
It is the right thing for some, but
Yep.
for many, it's not. For many, it's not. And there are holistic approaches. Even doing the drops of the Bach flowers can really help bring down the stress where someone feels safe enough to talk and to start a process.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So yeah, we could talk all day about this subject. And I have my opinions about pharmaceutical companies and big business and how it's often put above the needs of people.
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess they're also kind of, in a sense, almost direct or honest about that, in that, you know, if you're a company, then your main prerogative in life is to make money for your shareholders. You know, that's what you're trying to do. You know, and they might not put that on the cover of their medications, but of course that's basically what they're doing, and it's not really hidden. And then the kind of gray area is like, okay, but so now you're going to behave like another company, like take a typically aggressive area of like fuels or something like this, where companies will fight each other like crazy over their market share and resort to dirty tactics. And it's kind of okay in some industries maybe, but in human health, of course, it's never really going to be a good fit, you know, to have this kind of aggressive marketing and pushing other players out, you know. So there's a kind of huge incentive to push non-profit making or anything challenging out of the way, you know.
Right.
And then I just see it as market forces rather than something kind of really bad in some way. And it's, I don't know.
Well, I think it comes back to us as individuals to say, wait, how is this medication serving me? Is it actually doing what I was told? Is it actually helping me? Or has it helped me enough? And now there's a new stage to my healing where I actually have been able to come to enough safety and balance where I can work on a deeper level of something I couldn't get before.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then also for the person to know that they do have that power inside. They may need someone to help them get there. They may need to use the body to release what's stored. They may need to connect with their ancestral level with constellation work. But when we look to the other or to a medication for the answer, we may feel powerless before it, like only this can heal me. And so it's really learning the path for each person. Again, I don't want to say medication is a no-no, but there are so many alternatives to it. There really are. And I think a lot of the depression and anxiety that especially right now people are facing, these things can be treated without any kind of medication.
I guess another angle I see, you kind of touched on it earlier, is that, like, you know, in the same way that people are nervous to come to a group or to get involved with a therapist, it's like any form of therapy pretty much requires some kind of inner journey or inner looking or examination of, say, your childhood, you know, the possibility of acknowledging that there's significant trauma in your life and this kind of thing. And yet in many cultures, you know, it's the way is to just do whatever you need to do to keep a front present that you can meet the outside world with, and to simply not engage in any kind of inner journey. And then, of course, taking a drug for a psychological condition is kind of more attractive on that level, because it's like, I just want something to deal with. You know, like a lot of people come to therapy with, like, I've just got this issue, I just want to deal with it, you know, in the same way as they might be trying to get their car fixed or something like that. And so, you know, drugs kind of appeal.
Quicker solution.
Yeah, a quick solution where you don't have to invest too much emotion or whatever. You don't have to in any way kind of ideally disturb your functioning as a human being out in the world. You know, you just want to keep on functioning and doing that, but you want to take this issue out and get rid of it somehow. And this kind of
you have to, right? It's starting or life puts you in a situation where you have to make a change because these patterns you have, or these these reactions are now causing a problem. So actually it's limiting me in my life. I have to do something about it.
Yeah. Yeah, people can. I mean, I came to that where when in my late 30s, you know, when I first started to do therapy, was like my life became so utterly dysfunctional that then I had to do something. You know, if social needs are totally not being met, then, you know, then at some point you will kind of bite the bullet and go for it. But I guess, you know, for a lot of people, they just keep themselves in a space where they're not particularly happy, but they can just about keep the front up and fulfill a certain level of social and family duty, you know, and there's, you know, and why take the risk to kind of look inside? But I guess the part that can change is, like you were talking about Buenos Aires and how it's kind of socially acceptable there to have a therapist, and almost like to not have a therapist is like kind of seems a little odd, you know, as
why not?
you know, that's the opposite. I mean, if that changes in the West, that could change a lot as well. Hey, if it became a bit more, I mean, a lot of people talk about trauma these days, hey, and talk about this kind of big buzzword,
to know that
like that.
really there is so much going on about informing us about trauma. What is that, right? What is trauma? And to know there's different types of trauma, right? The developmental trauma from our early years, which is the most difficult to treat actually, or trauma PTSD coming back from war or some sort of accident. To know that we actually all have some sort of trauma. Life is not perfect, you know, and I think often about this metaphor of when the butterfly is in the caterpillar is in the cocoon, you know, struggling to get out. And I remember this metaphor that a man saw the butterfly struggling and he cut the cocoon to stop the struggle, and the wings were not big enough to fly. So to know that there is purpose in that struggle, that our life, if our life was perfect, if we had the perfect parents and we had the perfect setup, we wouldn't have those wings to fly.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in that, in a sense, but almost in some ways there is less kind of, you know, the classic kind of developmental trauma that guys like Reich were talking about, inadequate bond with the mother in the first year, heavy suppression of the kind of screaming phase of the terrible twos and that kind of stuff, you know, and also dissociation, schizoid person, you know, those, in a sense, those traumas have come down a bit, I think, in the last 50 years. You know, I haven't been around so long, but I think they've kind of come down a bit. And so when you see, what do they call people like millennial or Generation Z in particular, you know, people born in the 2000s, they probably don't have the same high levels of those kinds of traumas, but it's also quite difficult for them in a culture that's quite driven towards comfort to actually find meaning and satisfaction in their life, because it's like, I was talking to, like, I go out to meetups a lot here, and I meet a lot of people in their 20s and 30s, you know, and because I don't know so many people around, and my Spanish is not so great, but and it's very common to find people who are quite kind of socially functional, but yeah, I don't know, I should get a girlfriend, but none of them really excite me, and yeah, I've got this job, and it's like that there's nothing really pushing them internally, you know, there's not a huge emotional charge from the past. Their childhood has been kind of okay, and it's also hard for them in a world where there's a lot of potential for comfort to kind of find themselves and achieve like a deeper meaning in their life, you know. And whilst all the endless kind of very heavy trauma from sort of 50s nuclear family or whatever, you know, in America or England, you know, that's kind of dissipated a lot, I guess, in some places. You know, it also leaves a certain question as to, okay, we can de-traumatize people a bit, but then does that necessarily give them a better life, really? You know, there are questions, you know, it's complex. That's what I see.
Oh, yeah, it is very complex, right? Talking about culture, age, and generation itself. To know these generations, they've lived their life with the internet, with this constant connection. And the way they connect with others is different. That, you know, I can remember what life was like before the internet, and I'm thankful for that. But many generations will not know. And so I believe that the trauma is still there, but it's coming in different ways. And because what is trauma? disconnection, the disconnection from self. And so while I embrace technology and use it online now for groups and individual sessions, to continue to educate ourselves about what is the potential impact of too much. You know, even as I do this interview, I notice that the screen can suck me in. So to be aware of the body, okay, come back. These little things, right? That we're just in a new and evolving world. And so I believe that these beliefs and these things we've known about, like trauma, and the different forms of it, that they're still there, but they are being played out in new ways. That's what I believe. And that's what I see. But right, when you're young and everything seems okay, or life hasn't put you in that difficult situation where you see, wow, I have to make a change, that the comfort of life may not push you to look for something else, you know? But I do believe, and I think a lot of it is because of this pandemic, where people, they realize, you know what, I'm not okay. I really am not okay. And what is not being okay? It's okay, first of all, to admit that and to say that. And look, my neighbor's not okay also. And to see that I actually feel better after I moved a bit, after I did some yoga or body work. And wow, I should do that again. And just gradual opening in consciousness. Really, that's what I focus on more, on the most. That's really what I believe is the way forward in these new times to come. That's healing. It makes our immune system stronger. Opening in our consciousness, it doesn't come easily. It's a journey, you know. Carl Jung said there is no coming to consciousness without pain. So I think that's really one of the obstacles, one of the biggest obstacles, that people are nervous to start, because I'm going to feel some pain. I may have to face something from the past, and I don't want to look back. This is a big issue with family constellations, because we essentially are going back, always with the purpose to go forward. And so the truth is, the past is the present. It's in our body. We know that. It's in our body. It's trapped there. So how could it just be the past? It's today. It's affecting my life today.
Yeah.
So I like to really remind people that the past is the present until it's made conscious.
It's true. It's true, hey? Totally true. Yeah.
But fortunately, there are many tools of looking back where you may not even talk about what happened, and you may work on it in a somatic way. So the entry point is different. Or maybe you do a constellation and it gives you that quick viewpoint of what happened and what happened in my family story. Now I can understand it, and I don't need to be in therapy every week talking about it. I see it. Now I need to work out the tension with the body, for example. Or maybe they just need a new view of what happened, to open their heart and see that it came from the family system, that it comes from a bigger place. It wasn't just because my mom didn't love me or my dad was hard on me. It came from somewhere. That changes a lot. So it's exciting, honestly, all these new techniques and therapies, because of the expansion of consciousness that's happening. That's the way I see it. They go hand in hand.
Yeah. I mean, certainly I see that, like, people with a very rigid view of how the past was for them, you know, that's usually symptomatic of a trauma. I mean, it sounds kind of funny, because, you know, the sense as a Westerner I have is that, of course, the past has all happened and it's kind of set in stone. But actually, you know, how we look at our own past can be very, very fluid, you know. And that was a force I didn't really understand until I started to do therapy myself. And then I started to look back at parts of my life which I'd considered to be like a war zone or really hellish, from addiction and whatever, and illnesses and stuff, and then come to see them quite differently, you know, like almost naturally see them quite differently, because I just started to clear some of the kind of the traumatic holding or cortical inhibition or whatever you want to call it out from that past. And when there was no longer a kind of charge of energy stuck in my system, holding the past in a certain way, because in a sense we get stuck, you know, when the charge is in there, we see things in a certain negative way, and the kind of intention of the unconscious is to drive us into the negative feeling so that we can get into it and feel and go through it. But from the kind of higher mind level, we just don't want to go in there, you know. We're like being dragged by one part of our mind into something and pulling back with another part of our mind, and it creates a kind of unsatisfying life. And this is one of the kind of this fundamental conflict between the kind of Freudian unconscious or conscious mind, you know, where one part's trying to drag you into the shit so you can kind of clear it, and the other part's just, no, I'm not going back in there, you know. It's and the body work is a kind of way forwards in some ways, I find.
Right, exactly. Maybe the body makes way for the path and shows you what's there. Just the body-mind connection, that it doesn't even have to come by talking and remembering the past.
Yeah.
Let the body do the work.
Yeah.
You know, or just starting, but asking yourself, really, how am I feeling? I'm going to be honest with myself. For me, it was about peace. It was about peace. I didn't have peace. My mind was constantly running. I couldn't rest. I was stuck in indecision, couldn't make decisions. I felt stuck in my life. Yeah. And so once I started getting a better handle on those thoughts and knowing about the present and being in the now, you know, it was really Eckhart Tolle and The Power of Now. That book changed my life, and it has many people. And to wake up to what's happening here, and wow, that's just one part of it. The body is the same. And then opening up to these influences on the systemic approach with constellation work and other approaches, that I am one of many, that this is not just my story, it comes from many others. And to know that we are also carrying the burden of ancestors and others that we may know or never knew, and that energetically we can give these things back and stay in our own power, which empowers us and allows us to live an authentic life. It was also, I felt very clearly that it was a lack of peace that started my journey. It was this kind of relentless nature of wanting more and wanting more fulfillment, and this desire to be happy in how I was spending my time. I need to have, and for me personally, I knew I needed work that was fulfilling. That it wasn't enough to just go get a paycheck and be with my family or friends after. I needed more. Everybody decides what they need, but the starting point is, how am I feeling really? Let me be honest with myself.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Well, that basic looking inside, you know, that is it, isn't it? You know, it's just to say, okay, let's just look inside and be honest, you know?
Yeah, and to know that that's okay. And then once you decide that, it's as they say, when the student's ready, the teacher appears, whether it's a teacher or a therapist or even a friend. Then you'll start to see that when you're ready, those things line up and the door opens for you. It is really about being ready to start any kind of process, whether it is more of a continual process or even a one-time constellation. So I really look at the connection with life, with what happens to us, what is our story, and what is life pushing me to do? Maybe it's challenging, you know, maybe I've hit rock bottom. Well, if I have, the only way is up.
Yeah. Well, there is something very healing about hitting a place where it's just totally dark, in that, you know, you kind of know it then, you know?
Yeah. Oh yeah, those dark nights of the soul that maybe our soul needs to actually wake up and to know that, wow, I want more. And I'm starting to believe that there can be more.
Well, thank you.
Maybe it comes by meeting somebody too and realizing that, wow, something like that exists. I didn't know.
Yeah.
You know, and letting the door come that way too. It's really opening up to new, and seeing that new and change is a good thing. It doesn't come easy. But if we are to evolve as people, and why? To feel better, to be more who we are, to live an authentic life.
Absolutely. Well, it's lovely speaking to you, Meghan.
Well, you too. Thank you for your time.
Mm. Have you got anything you'd like to just put out as we come towards the close, or just say, or words of inspiration? Anything to do with reaching out towards you, we can put in the description, like your website and stuff like that. But if you have anything.
Yeah, please do. My website is gettotheorigin.com, and I've chosen that because with the constellation work and with bioenergetics in a different way, getting to the origin of the pain, getting to the starting point. If not, we're just treating the symptom and it will continue.
Mm.
And so getting to the origin of that, where is the origin? Where was the starting point? Let's work from there to work it out and to strengthen you. Therefore, you won't have to keep continually treating it on a symptom, continue to treat the symptoms. And so really, although we're living some difficult times right now, on another hand, we're living, it's a very inspiring time because of these opportunities out there. And because of this expansion of consciousness that's happening. And this is what I see going forward. This is the way forward. And this is how we're all going to feel better, no matter what darkness is there and what challenges there are in this world we're in right now. So that's what I would encourage, and to know that there are many ways. Knowing yourself is the greatest gift.
Yeah. And it is, it's like, in the UK, we had like 7 months on lockdown. And at the end of the day, I mean, it's like, when I used to pay a lot of money for therapy, sometimes they'd lock you in a room for 3 days with a load of people, and encounter workshops, this kind of thing. And it is, boat process and stuff like this. It is self-encounter. What you meet in lockdown is also a part of you. It might not be a part of you that you're very keen to come into contact with, but it is still a part of you. It's like, and being able to own that is redemptive.
And this COVID has put a mirror on us. How did I act in lockdown? What was my response?
Yeah.
Was it to be busy and not move? Or was it to miss what I don't have and to seek and need to go out and find? We all had slightly different responses, but that in itself says so much. So really trying to see this difficult moment we're in as an opportunity.
Yeah.
I believe that in Chinese, the symbol for crisis is challenge and opportunity at the same time. So let those challenges be an opportunity. That's how we can live an authentic life and not just respond and stay in that victim role, perhaps.
Yeah. Wise words. Thank you so much for coming along today, Meghan. It's been lovely just to chat to you and have this free-form discussion. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Really enjoyed it too.